your FQ is more important than your IQ. And your FQ is your failure quotient. And what it means is, how often can you fail and have the resiliency to get back up?
I gotta keep going. Welcome to another episode of The Pursuit with Dr. Pat. This one is very, very personal to me. 25 years ago, I walked into a recruiting visit thinking there was no way. Blown ACL, dream was fading. I'd already put in some of the military paperwork to if it didn't work out. And it was literally a God wink to me as I was driving here this morning that it was 25 years ago to this week that this happened. I was a kid who had just lost what I thought was my only path forward. You know, thank goodness for Coach John Spezia who gave me the chance to prove myself, but I still had no scholarship. Didn't know what I was going to do. And that was my identity at that time. So the injury took the scholarship away, or really so I thought. Coach Sullivan, who you'll be introduced here shortly, saw something that I couldn't quite see in myself. He offered the scholarship once he saw, I think, the mindset that I brought, even though I couldn't quite jump over the free throw line. One man's belief, it changed the entire trajectory of my life, and it allows us to be here today, 25 years later, to the week, and we're here impacting thousands and thousands of more lives, tens of thousands, because of this man. The result is exactly what I just said. 25 years later, I'm sitting next to him, not really as the kid anymore, even though I do have that kid at heart with me. But listen to this. We're inside the building that carries his name. This is the Pat Sullivan Center. And we're going to be not necessarily interviewing the man who refused to let me quit on myself, but we're going to be listening to the brilliance of what he has to this day and the wisdom he carries to this day of frameworks that I carry with myself, and I'm able to implement that with my teams and anybody that may come into my life. He doesn't like this, but he needs to hear it, and all of you do too. So Coach Pat Sullivan is in 8 Hall of Fames. Let me repeat that, 8 Hall of Fames. He has won 11 Coach of the Year awards, 4 Administrator of the Year awards. Get this, 602 career wins as a basketball head coach, 44 years coaching and leading. And when I say leading, he is leading athletic departments, he's leading fundraising, he's leading organizing where the team's gonna practice when we didn't have quite a gym yet. And I think we know that that's the Armory, right, Coach? That's right. And this is what I think is the most impressive, and I believe Nick Saban would agree. 98, let me say that again, 98% of his seniors graduate the college degree. I had the pleasure to be one of them because he demanded that of us, demanded it of us. He was valedictorian of his own college class. Like, this is ridiculous, right? It sounds like a movie. Lifetime Achievement Awards include Lewis University, one of my favorite associations, which is the IBCA, which is the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association, and of course, just a stalwart, one of the godfathers of Joliet and the Joliet Chamber of Commerce. He has written 3 books, not 1 book, but 3. A.T.T.I.T.U.D.E, Team Building, From the Bench to the Boardroom, which I still follow with my team today as one of my operating systems for what I believe in and how I operate, and Lessons in Leaderships from Athletics, which is embedded in my DNA at this point. The Recreation Center, like I said, is at the University of St. Francis, and it bears his name. So, Coach, before we get into it, I want the audience to understand who they're listening to And not just that, I want them to listen to your brilliance. And at this point, I'll be quiet and let your brilliance shine.
Pat, I really appreciate that, but I don't know about the brilliance. I feel compelled that I have to tell our audience that everything I know about education, I learned from a radio show, the Wally Phillips show out of Chicago. And Wally said, and this is all I know about education after 44 years, he said, Mom went in to wake up Johnny, hit him on the shoulder and said, Johnny, it's time to go to school. Well, Johnny said, Mom, I'm not going to school today. I'm not going because I hate school. I hate all the kids there, and I really hate the teachers. Rolled over. Well, Mom hit him again. She said, Johnny, you are going to school this morning, and you're going for 2 reasons. You are 45 years old, and you are the principal. So that's my knowledge of education. Obviously, Pat has asked me to share some thoughts on leadership, and he's already used the word that I feel is the most important word that athletes can bring to the athletic arena. It's the most important word that students can bring to the academic arena, and certainly the most important word that leaders can bring to their leadership roles. And that word is attitude. So what I'd like to do this morning is use that word as an acronym and give each letter of the word a characteristic that might make for a quality leader. And what I'd like the listeners to do, just think about the characteristics and see if you think they have merit. Now, before we get to the acronym, there's 2 overall thoughts on leadership that I'd like to share. The first actually comes, Pat, from where we're at right now. Everything in this university is based on the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi. Now, he wrote something that in the 14th century that I think still resonates today for leaders. And for those of you who are not of the Christian faith, please substitute your faith-based word for the word gospel. And St. Francis wrote this: preach the gospel. If necessary, use words. And I don't think he's denigrating the words of a leader as much as he's saying, who is that leader? What values does he or she stand for? And what example is set on a daily basis? And I do believe that far outweighs the words. And the second point actually came from the 75th anniversary of Forbes magazine. And they dedicated the magazine to what may be the most important thing leaders do: decision making. They went out and they interviewed people, leaders from the military world, business world, education world, and political world. And they asked them simply to write essays on what were their most poignant points about decision making. And I read it from cover to cover, because at the time, as the athletic chair, we had a little bit over 370 athletes and 60 coaches that I was working with. So I wanted to learn everything I could about decision making. I read the magazine from cover to cover, and I came away with 3 words that I thought were the best part of the entire magazine. They were written by Jim Collins, who wrote the outstanding book From Good to Great. And here's what he wrote: the best decisions made in American boardrooms for the last 25 years all began with the leader saying, this is going to sound incongruous, I don't know. Now, I don't know about you, but I've worked with leaders who know. In fact, they know everything. So when I say that I worked with them, that's a misnomer, because nobody could work with them. They already had all the answers. And then I work with leaders who, when a problem came up, they would bring in their cabinet people, and they would say to them, here's the issue we're dealing with. I don't know how we should actually attack it. So what I want to do is go around the room and have each of you give me your insights on what you think we should do. Then, when we finish, I'll make the final decision. So here's what I found: that The leaders who were not afraid to say, I don't know, were the most secure and strongest leaders that I've ever worked with. So let's get to the acronym. The A stands for the word attitude. And I'd like for you to think about this. Does one person's attitude make a difference? And I think there is, because of the cynicism and negativism that tends to abound today, I think a lot of people would say no. One person's attitude really doesn't make a difference. Well, let me share 4 names with them, and then they can see what they think. The first name is Adolf Hitler. I think his attitude made a difference, and it certainly made a difference for the people of the Jewish faith, because 6 million of them were asphyxiated during the Holocaust. I happened to be working a basketball camp and clinic in Austria, and because I had read a lot about the Holocaust, I asked the coaches, are we near a concentration camp? And if we are, could you bring me there? Well, we were, and they did. And all I can tell you, it was the most eerie feeling that I've ever had in my life. They gave us an instrument that looked like a walkie-talkie. It was numbered from 1 to 20. Each number corresponding to the room that you were in. So when you came into room 5, you pushed the 5. And they didn't mince their words. They told you all the horrific things that happened in that room and the other 19 of them. So I think that we certainly can say that his attitude made a difference, Adolf Hitler's. And when I left that tour of the concentration camp, I couldn't believe that anybody could think of the atrocities that were done in that camp, let alone do them. Next name, Charles Manson. Now, there's a book written by the prosecuting attorney in the Charles Manson trial. And the book's titled Helter Skelter. And once I finished reading the book, I couldn't believe that one man could inculcate the attitude that he did in his quote-unquote family to commit some of the most heinous crimes in the history of our country. Now, on the other side of the coin, how about Winston Churchill? When he's Prime Minister of England during World War II, he was asked to come to his alma mater and give a presentation. Well, in the presentation, he said 4 words, and he said them 3 times, right in the middle of the presentation. And I think the 4 words epitomized what England was about during all of World War II. Churchill said, never, never give in. And they didn't. Now I'd like to take you to Busch Stadium, St. Louis. It's the 3rd game of the World Series, and it's the Boston Red Sox and the St. Louis Cardinals. So I get a call from a guy I played college baseball with, Ed Spezio. He's a utility infielder on the Cardinal team. And he says, I've got tickets for you and your dad if you'd like to come to St. Louis for the 3rd game of the series. My dad loved baseball. He just loved it. And he had never had the opportunity to see a World Series game, nor did I. So we, of course, took up Ed on the tickets. First inning, 3rd hitter for Boston, Carl Yastrzemski, who later went on to be a Hall of Fame player. On the mound, Bob Gibson, another Hall of Fame player. Well, the first 2 pitches that Gibson throws at Yastrzemski, he's throwing right at his legs, and Yastrzemski literally had to jump out of the box to not get hit. So you had an idea what was going on. And certainly, on the 3rd pitch, he hit him. Now, we asked Ed after the ball game, why was that sequence happening? And he said Yastrzemski had made some remarks after the 2nd game in Boston that Red Schoendienst, the manager of the Cardinals, took umbrance with. So he ordered Gibson to hit him. Now, if Gibson didn't hit him, he would have been fined $1,000. Now, I think $1,000 is a pretty good chunk of money today. Imagine what it was in 1967. So I say all that because it reminded me of another fella who made a difference. Because when he batted Unlike Yastrzemski, he didn't wear a helmet. There were no helmets in his day. And the pitchers didn't throw at his legs, they threw at his head. Then he may have played the worst position possible to play, second base. So when the opponent was coming to steal second, and his vision was to the catcher, then he had to catch the ball and come down and administer tag. And it wasn't unusual that the opponents did not slide into the bag. Rather, they slid spikes high, trying to spike him in the face. Then finally, he signed a contract that for 3 years he couldn't fight. But Jackie Robinson was a fighter. He was an All-American halfback at UCLA, and he fought for everything in the civil rights movement till his deathbed. So I think we can say that the attitude of Jackie Robinson made a difference, especially for the young black athletes in the Negro Leagues. So I think to end up this part on attitude, I do think that one person's attitude makes a difference. But it's got to be said, it can make a difference this way, and it can detract from or even destroy an organization. Or it can make a difference this way, and it could advance and enhance an organization. Now, I think this one wife, she may have had a bad attitude. Her husband had to appear before the judge. So the judge said to her husband, she was sitting in the back of the courtroom, "I understand you stole a can of peaches." And the fellow said, "Yeah, I did, Your Honor." He said, "How many peaches were in that can?" He says, 6. He said, "All right, you've got 6 nights in jail." And from the back of the courtroom, his wife is raising her hands and she yells to the judge, "Your Honor, he also stole a can of peas." Now, the first tee, when Vince Lombardi was coaching the Green Bay Packer teams, he used to say to the players, individual commitment to a group cause is what makes a team, a business, a church, or a country work. John Wooden, famous UCLA coach, used to say to his players, the main ingredient of a star is the rest of the team. He also would say, it's amazing how much we can get accomplished when nobody cares who gets the credit. And then El McGuire, a fellow whom I worked with for over a decade, used to tell the Marquette players, either we all go uptown together or nobody goes uptown at all. So obviously the first T stands for teamwork. And in my day, if I were to, I think we all would do this, pick the best shooter. And that would have been a fellow named Jerry West. Now, West, in fact, he is the NBA logo, but he played 14 years in the NBA, played on one championship team. I think you could make argument that the next best player to Michael Jordan, whom I believe was the best, could be Oscar Robertson. He was the first player ever to average a double-double, double figure scoring, double figures assists. Just a great player. He played 14 years in the NBA, one championship team. But there was a fellow named Bill Russell, and he played with the Boston Celtics, and he played 13 years in the NBA. And in 11 of the 13 years, they won the NBA championship. Now, I don't think you can win, whether it's athletics or a business or whatever it may be, if you're not surrounded by talented people. But also with that is the disclaimer, talented people don't necessarily win. Talented people who play together, they win. And Boston knew that. They knew they had the talent. They knew they had the talent that was willing to play together. So in the 13 years that Russell played with the Boston Celtics, they made 2 trades. They didn't want to break up what they had. And then Russell used to say this about the Celtics, that when they walked into a facility for practice or for a game, they took their individual egos and they left them outside the door. And I've never heard this verbiage before, but if I had learned it while I was still coaching, I would have used it quite a bit. So he said we kept our individual egos were outside the door. But what we brought in was our team ego. And our team ego was saying to the opponent, you better bring a good game tonight if you think you're going to beat us, because we know we are. Now, I think there's no question but the teamwork transcends athletics. When Stephen Covey wrote his famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he said as a business consultant, when he walked into businesses, he found 3 kinds of people: independent, dependent, and interdependent. And he said the businesses that developed interdependent people, where everybody knows we all need each other and no job is too small, they were the most successful businesses. Interdependent people. Then I worked for a priest who was the principal of Providence Catholic High School. And he had a sign on his desk. And that sign, you might like this, dictated exactly how he managed, how he led. And the sign said, none of us is smarter than all of us. So like I mentioned about the cabinet, issues came up, he would call in his cabinet, he get all the input he could, all the teamwork that he could get from the people with whom he worked most closely. And then he would make his decision. And a final thought on that, I found a hard time believing this, but I'll explain why. The Fortune 500 companies were given a survey. What characteristics did they look for in hiring people? And it came down to 13 characteristics listed in order of importance. And some of the characteristics were critical thinking, problem solving, presenting. But the number one characteristic that they said they looked for was teamwork. And I knew that was true in athletics, but I didn't know that it would be true in business. And I learned this from my own children. My daughter Colleen went to the Sidley Law Firm downtown Chicago. Immediately she was put on a team. My daughter Katie went to Arthur Andersen when they were the top accounting firm in the country. Immediately put on a team. Ann went to Deloitte & Touche. Immediately put on a team. My son was fortunate when he got out of the university, he got a job with IBM. And again, he was put on a team. My daughter Bridget, she didn't go into corporations or business. She went into college teaching. But even there, as an English teacher, she had to work with her team of other English teachers and work with the department head to try to make that department the best they could. So I did come to believe that I can see now why businesses had teamwork at the top of those hiring criteria. And in some organizations, unfortunately, we don't get teamwork. And sometimes it can happen in a church. And the example of that was this reverend was talking about the evils of alcohol. And he was all fired up at the end of the speech, and he said, now, if I could take all the beer in the world, I'd throw it right in the river. All the wine, right in the river. All the whiskey in the world, I'd throw it right in the river. Exhausted, he sat down. The choir director got up and said, please turn your hymns to hymn 45. Shall we gather at the river? So much for that. Second T, the great English essayist John Donne once wrote an essay about people who always complain. Nothing is ever right. Their back hurts, their knees hurt, the weather's no good. Nothing's ever right. The second T is the antithesis of people who complain. It's the opposite of that. And it stands for toughness or for tough-mindedness. And the tough-minded people whom I have been privileged to work with, they don't complain a lot. We all complain some, but they complain very little because they're too busy doing. I always like this distinction. See what you think between a manager and a leader. A manager tries to do things right, but a leader tries to do the right things. So for all you leaders out there, there's one thing that I'm absolutely positive of, and that is when you're trying to do the right things, you have critics, okay? And maybe a lot of them. Well, let me tell you this, 2 thoughts on critics. Number one, you're in good company. When Dr. Martin Luther King went into Birmingham, Alabama, he organized a nonviolent march. Of course, he was thrown in jail because at that time in Birmingham's history, you couldn't have a march. Now when he's in jail, all his critics came out. And some of them fellow clergy who said to him, Dr. King, the problem is you. You're an agitator. You're a rebel rouser. So Dr. King then wrote his famous essay from the Birmingham jail. And paraphrasing, he began it with this: I very seldom take the time to answer my critics. Because if I did take the time to answer my critics, that's all I'd have time for. Father Theodore Hesburgh, president of Notre Dame for 26 years, University of Notre Dame, he said he tried to do everything that he could for faculty during those years. And he, better pay, better benefits, better office space. And in all that time, he got 2 thank you notes in 26 years. However, when he made a decision that the faculty didn't like, his office was inundated with criticism. So maybe think about this. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about critics. Maybe adopt the Irishman's philosophy. And it goes this way. There's only 2 things you should worry about. Either you're well or you're sick. Now, if you're well, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you're sick, you got 2 things you got to worry about. You're going to get better or you're going to die. Now, if you're going to get better, you got nothing to worry about. But if you're going to die, 2 things you got to worry about. You're either going to heaven or you're going to hell. No problem if you're going to heaven. And if you're going to hell, you're going to be so busy shaking hands with all your friends, you're not going to have time to worry. So much for the worrying. Now I'd like you to think of this for me, if you would. Best teacher you ever had. Best coach, if you played athletics, you ever had. Or the best leader that you ever worked with. So let me ask you 2 questions and see what you think, which one would be the more appropriate of the 2. Was that teacher, coach, or leader easy? Or was he or she tough and demanding? When I ask that to live audiences, no hands go up when I say easy. When you say tough, tough-minded, all the arms go up. And I think that's because maybe we didn't even think we could get to this level. But that leader, through his or her toughness and demanding, they got us to that level. And then I think there's a second thing. If their toughness rubbed off on you, and because of them, you became a little tougher, then I think that those leaders gave you a great gift. And that was best articulated in Reverend Robert Schuller's title of his book. And the title said this: Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Now, I got out of college right after the Civil War. So when we were going into education, in our business class, in our education classes, they actually would say, when you walk into that classroom, you got to be tough. And you got to be so tough, you don't smile till Christmas. Well, I think it was okay to smile before Christmas. And I also think when I reflect on the best leaders that I ever worked with, they were demanding. They were tough. Because if they weren't, nothing would get done. But also, they brought some fun and humor and joy into the workplace. And I know that can be done because I've seen it and lived it. The eyes for intelligence. Now, could this be an oxymoron of somebody contradiction of terms. Of all people, a coach talking about intelligence. Everybody knows all we do is throw out the balls. But the intelligent people in our society are the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants. Now, I threw in the accountants because 3 of my children majored in accounting, and I like to tell them this story. 10 accountants interviewed for a job, one position open. The 10th person is having a great interview. He's going to get the job hands down. So at the end of the interview, the boss or the leader of the interviewing team said, I got one last question for you. What's 7 times 3? 22. He didn't hesitate. A week later, he gets a call. He's got the job. About a month into the job, he gets the courage to go into the boss, and he says, I know I messed up the interview at the very end. Can I ask you why did you guys hire me? And the boss says, we actually interviewed 10 people. The guy said, I know. He said, well, of the 10, you were the closest. Now, those of you who were college graduates out there, you had to take either the ACT exam or the SAT or both to be able to get into college. Now, the purpose of those exams was that they're supposed to tell the college, if you have the intelligence to do college work at their college. I never believed in those exams, and I never will, because there's one thing they can't measure. They can't measure what's in a person's heart. How bad does he or she want that degree? That's what it's all about in the last analysis. Now, when it comes to intelligent people whom I've worked with, I think I see 2 traits, and see what you think. The first is every intelligent person whom I've ever worked with had developed the ability to listen. Take you to New York. Got a high school coach sitting here. I'm sitting in the middle. John Wooden is sitting here. Now, Coach Wooden's teams won 10 national championships the last 12 years he coached. And at one stretch, they won 7 in a row. I don't think that either of those records will ever be matched. So now, if you were a fly on the wall at that dinner, and if you thought speaking was the key to intelligence, you would have thought the high school coach was John Wooden, and John Wooden, the high school coach, because the high school coach did most of the talking. And Coach Wooden, maybe the best coach in American sport ever, did most of the listening. They did a study of CEOs. They asked them, how do you spend your time? And the results came out to 10% of the time writing, 15% of the time reading, 30% of the time speaking, but 45% of their time, nearly half their time, was spent listening. I was very proud of my daughter, Colleen. She opened up her own law firm in the city, and she often had to negotiate contracts with different people and to see if maybe they could come to a compromise that they both could work with. So she really had to listen, because some of the contracts are into the millions of dollars. Every day, Colleen opened up her computer, and I was so proud when she told me this. She saw on the screen, I won't learn anything today by talking, but I will learn today by listening. And Will Rogers may have summed it up best when he said, never pass up a good opportunity just to shut up. And the second thing that I see, second concept that I see in the intelligent people whom I've been blessed to work with, is they have core values. But more importantly than that, they have perseverance to their core values. So during good or bad times, they stick with their core values. Thomas Edison is said to have failed in his experiments 10,000 times before he found electricity. Even his buddies came up to him and said, why do you keep doing that? All you're meeting with is failure. And Edison said to them, because now I know 10,000 ways that it won't work. Now, I don't know what he would have got on the ACT or the SAT, but I know he had perseverance. How about this fella? They flunked him in 6th grade, and the teacher literally wrote, "This student is dumb and hopeless." Well, that dumb and hopeless guy went on to be the Prime Minister of England. And I think if you ask many, many people who was the best leader during the 20th century, it would be Winston Churchill. Or how about a teacher said to this fellow, "What are you doing drawing all the time? You've got no talent to draw, Walt Disney." Or if they would have said, "Why are you messing with music? Don't you understand? You're deaf." And if they had said that, we'd have no Beethoven. Now, these guys were geniuses. What about guys like me, okay? I don't know how many of you saw the movie Rudy, but I would say if you haven't seen it yet, maybe think about it with your children. Rudy, if he were here today, would tell you he graduated 3rd in his class, 3rd from the bottom. And then he would say this, from 1st grade to senior year in high school, teachers either said to him verbally or by their actions they were saying it, "Rudy, you're too dumb to learn." So when Rudy got out of high school, he went and worked in a factory. Then he stayed there for about 3 years and enlisted in the Navy. 2 years in the Navy, he came back to that same factory. And it is true, like what the movie said, one of his co-workers fell to his death from about 40 feet. And that's when Rudy said, "I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. I'm going to go to college." Then he said, "But I'm going to my favorite college, the University of Notre Dame." Well, given his academic background, Rudy could never get into Notre Dame. So people in the community, when he said that, laughed at him. Then Rudy said, not only that, at 5'9", 185 pounds, I'm going to play football at Notre Dame. So the laughter just grew louder. Now, right across the street from Notre Dame was a junior college called Holy Cross. It was run by the Holy Cross brothers, whereas Notre Dame it is still run by the Holy Cross priests. So there was an affiliation between the two. The Holy Cross Junior College was willing to admit Rudy, which Notre Dame wasn't, of course. And they gave them testing on the first week that they arrived on campus. After the testing, they told Rudy he had dyslexia. Rudy will tell you it was the best day of his life because now he knew why the learning came difficultly. It wasn't that he was dumb, it was that there was an impediment to his learning. So eventually, after being rejected 3 times by Notre Dame, they admitted Rudy. Rudy got his degree from Notre Dame. And Rudy did play football his junior and senior year at Notre Dame. So today, and that movie's got to be 40 or 50 years old. Today, Rudy is still asked to come around the country and talk about his journey. And like I say, if your children maybe could see the movie, his themes are twofold. Don't let anybody tell you you're dumb. And number 2, I had the dream of going to Notre Dame. Don't let anyone take your dreams away. They're your dreams, and you keep working to follow. And the third T, there's a book that's the study of corporate America. Probably a lot of you out there have read the book, In Search of Excellence. And one of the tenets in the book leads me to the third T. And it says that one of the sad things in corporate America is that some of the top executives, vice presidents, presidents, CEOs, fail to come down to the people who are making the company work and say to them the third T, thank you. So they fail to come down to the secretaries, the people working the assembly line, the truck drivers, and say, thank you. Now, I'd like to take thank you, if I may, to another level. And I got to take you to the Ozarks. We're on a family vacation. this morning I've got the children with me. So we're driving along and we see a big sign that says Abundant Memories. Then we look down into the valley and there were like 7 cabins down there. Well, we had no idea what was going on, but we were on vacation. We had the time. So we went down there. Little did we know it was going to be the best history class that any of us ever had. We were met with a fella with a beard down to here in bib overalls. And he told us, I've traveled 200,000 miles across America getting different artifacts. And the artifacts would represent different times in American history. And that's what the cabins were. First one was the American Revolutionary War. Second one is Civil War. Third one, Depression, and so forth. He would use the artifacts, he'd take them out, and he would use them to tell you the mores of the time in American history. And we got to the Civil War. I learned I should have paid better attention in history class. He said that President Lincoln and the country were broke, so they couldn't pay the soldiers. So instead, they gave them land. And then he pulled out a big tool and he showed it to us and he said, people will call this tool primitive. He said, I call it ingenious. Then he showed us all the things that tool could do. I've said all that for this reason. He said, you know who built this country? It was not the big name politicians. And it was not the wealth of this country. It was the nobodies who built this country. And when he said that, I thought of my father. Dad had a 6th grade education, okay? Because he grew up during the Depression, and when he could go to work, it was time to go to work. Now, in my 34 years in higher education, I work with a lot of PhDs. So you've got a 6th grade education to the highest educational degree you can get. And I still believe this. I've yet to meet the PhD who had the wisdom of my father. In athletics, who are the nobodies? Don't they sit at the end of the bench? Okay? And when your starters and stars are walking around campus and you're having a good season, people can be complimenting them on the season and saying, we really enjoy watching you play. We'll be at the rest of the games. When the fellas at the end of the bench are walking around campus, they get no recognition because a lot of the people on campus don't even know they're on the team. The most street smart person I ever met and worked with was El McGuire when he was the coach at Marquette. And he had this insight. He said, when my players are in their 40s, I never worry about the guys who are on the bench. Because in their 40s, they're presidents, vice presidents, CEOs of companies. But he said, I do worry about the stars. Because you see, when they're in their 40s, nobody's carrying their bags for them, slapping them on the back, telling them how wonderful they are. And some of them really have a hard time dealing with that. What El said turned out to be true for myself and the University of St. Francis. We had 2 basketball players. One of them hardly played. The other one played sparingly. But like El McGuire said, they went to Chicago and they were superstars in Chicago businesses. So they came to the college and they said they'd like to have the court named after one of their teammates. And the teammate was Pat Quigley. Everybody loved Quiggs when he played here. Then, at 34 years of age, Pat got cancer. And they did have, he and Chris had 4 children. So the guys wanted Pat to be memorialized for what he meant to this university. And they gave quite a donation to the university to get that name on the court, which will be on there forever. So I would encourage the leaders. If you could just think about this, if you could just think about going to your people and especially the people who get little to no recognition, and thank them for all they're doing for your company. And the U, the letter U stands for the word you. And I'd like to give you two quick thoughts on you. One of the best definitions that I ever heard of a teacher, a coach, or a leader is a one-word definition. And that one word is facilitator. The great ones know how to facilitate the learning. They make the learning easier. And I think they do it. So think of the best teacher, coach, or leader you work with. Did they do these four things? Number one, they knew their subject matter, be it physics or football or products that are being made in the factory that they're in charge of. They knew their subject matter. Number two, they were organized. They could disseminate their knowledge. They could get the knowledge down to us. Now, some of you may have had that brilliant professor in the university, and he was brilliant. Probably wrote 2 or 3 books about his discipline. However, he couldn't get organized to bring his intelligence, his learning to us mortals. And that's why I always liked this statement about teaching and athletics. I have not taught till you have learned. And I think that should be a mantra for anyone doing any teaching. And the third thing, I think they all lead with enthusiasm. Not the rah-rah, things like that, but they're enthused when you do well. And finally, and most importantly, I think the great teachers, coaches, and leaders care. They care about the people in their charge. And I thought in the coaching profession, maybe the best example of that was a man named Amos Alonzo Stagg. He was the football coach at the University of Chicago when Chicago was still in the Big Ten. So they're playing Ohio State, Michigan, and so forth. Now, his degree was from Yale, and he got the degree in divinity because he was looking to study to be a reverend, to be a clergyman. But once he got working and coaching on a football field, he felt he could better administer to America's youth from the football field than he could the pulpit. If I were to ask you, who's the only person who can make you learn, or who can make you a great athlete, or who can make you a great leader, I think we all would agree the answer to that is you. You are responsible for your body of work, and nobody else. And I think we're getting away from that a little bit in today's education. Let's let the students, the young students know you're responsible for your body of work. Now, I know that what I just said is true in athletics. I've coached all conference players, all state players, and all Americans. And this is one thing I know. Maybe I facilitated their game a little bit, but the only reason they became the players they became was because what they did in the weight room, what they did in the off season, and what they did every night at practice. That's who made them the players that they became. Now, my second thought on you, see what you think. Albert Einstein once wrote that the only reason that I can think of as to why we're here is to help others. Now, I think as leaders, you are in a unique position where you can help others. And that might be something to consider. And the D, a coach who grew up in North Dakota, talked at a clinic, we were in Salt Lake City, about a woman whose name I never heard before nor since. Her name was Kay Vandermeer. And on September 26th of 1959, she bowled a 300 game to win the Women's National Bowling Championship. That happened in Minnesota. On the way home to North Dakota, where both she and the coach were from, her car was hit by a train. They didn't think she'd live. And it took 1 year before she ever walked. She had to learn how to walk again. And the irony of the story was same date, September 26th of 1964, 5 years later, she bowled a 290 game to win the North Dakota State Championship. And for those of you who bowl, she won the North Dakota Championship with her left arm because her right arm had been amputated from the accident. So the D is for determination. Kay Vandermeer certainly had determination. And now the corollary to that coach's story, I still believe is one of the most profound things I ever heard. And here's what it was. Your FQ is more important than your IQ. And your FQ is your failure quotient. And what it means is, how often can you fail and have the resiliency to get back up? And I really believe that all of us meet failure in our lives, personally, professionally, so forth. But the key is getting back up. And Vince Lombardi, again, the Green Bay coach, said it well. He said the glory in sport is not in never falling. It's in getting up after the fall. And Pat Riley, the former Laker coach and current president of the Miami Heat, said it this way: success is getting up one more time than you're knocked down. And I truly believe if you look at successful ventures today, and then you look at their history, that somewhere along the line, they met with failure. But they had people who had strong FQs and were determined to make that entity the best it could be. I started coaching at the high school named Providence Catholic High School, coaching and teaching. Now, when I got there, the school had only been in existence 3 years. So in athletics, we weren't very good, okay? And Pat, in basketball, Pat's sport, it wasn't could we score at the offensive end, it was could we get the ball across half court, okay? So we struggled. Today, if you walk into Providence High School, you're going to see 30 banners, 30, each of which represents a state championship team. So from not knowing if we could get it across half court to 30 state titles isn't bad. Now, this guy too, I think, was determined. He was at the pearly gates, and St. Peter came to him and he said, you know, I'd like to get into heaven. St. Peter said, well, God's got one rule. Did you ever do anything noble? So the guy thinks, and he says, well, would this fit? He said, one time I was driving along, and in a park across the street, I saw about 20 bikers, and they were really harassing a young girl. So I parked the car, I went over there, I didn't say a word, I went up to the biggest one, and I punched him right in the head. And when he fell down, I gave him a kick. He says, then I said to the other bikers, hey, any more of you guys want some of this? St. Peter said, wow, that's noble. When did that happen? He said, about 10 minutes ago. And finally, the E stands for effort. I used to think that effort was the key to becoming competent or good or great at anything that you're trying. I don't believe that anymore. Here's what I found. Too many people could give you a great effort on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but for whatever reason, they couldn't reach down and find that same effort Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I've come to believe this. It's not effort. It's consistency of effort. The great ones can bring the best effort that they got every day. It's not always their A game, but it definitely is the best effort that they've got that day and every day that they come into work. Next thing, I believe this. See what you think on this one. Some things, I think, cannot be taught, but they can be caught. Sandra Bullock, either the second to last or the last Jay Leno show, she said to him, Jay, I've been coming on your show for 20 years, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your graciousness. Then she thought for a bit, and she said, you know, I also appreciate that same graciousness from your staff. Now, I don't think that Jay Leno could have gotten a piece of paper and said, I want you to be gracious. And to do that, I want you to do number one, number two, number three. But I do think that the people working with him could catch his graciousness. And I believe that for all leaders. There may be things you cannot teach to the people with whom you're working, but they sure can catch your example. And the last thought, I think this might be a good legacy for leaders. And it goes like this. In life, it's not what we gather, it's what we scatter. And I believe if as a leader, you're scattering graciousness, kindness, and toughness, then I think you're making a major impact on the lives of the people whom you are serving. Thank you.
And Coach, as a callback to what little lessons I've had, as you can see, as you've taught me to take copious notes, regardless of where you're at. And you said, dang it, Pachars, you can't jump over the free throw line. But damn it, when we're in film study, you can carry a pen.
That's right.
And it's those little lessons that he's taught me, as you can see, as I've heard this great speech as I've been running. You can see the people at Notre Dame when he gave this speech live in front of the audience, and everybody's captivated with how well, as you can tell, how eloquent he is. I've stolen his word for life, which is unequivocal, when I first heard it in college. So I sat here just as a fan. I sat here looking at you and watching you, and that is your brilliance of you knowing that it isn't about you, it's about everyone else. And your servant leadership is that word that kind of is that underlying layer that I always strive to be. And by the way, I am that 45-year-old CEO that doesn't get out of bed and has to get reminded by Jill. Okay? Okay. So Coach, the standard that you've set, it comes back to you are the best mentor I've ever had. And that is the standard that you set, like you talked about earlier about the best coaches, the best mentors. You were tough, but you were fair. And you were fair, but you brought humor. But you also brought us back if we got a little bit too over our skis, right? So I was that kid 25 years ago, walking in not knowing what was going to happen. I know that I was going to give my best effort, but I also knew this. Coach saw this in me, and he extrapolated at me on a daily basis. He saw my FQ. He saw a guy who put his identity in basketball, blew his ACL out, and be like, I don't care about that you can't jump over the line. Hell, I can care how you shoot and play defense. However, I see a kid that will do anything in his power that I ask him to do. And I'm never going to ask him to do something I wouldn't ask of any that I don't think that he can achieve. And with that scholarship, it opened up the way for not only myself, but for my family. Again, as I was taking notes here, you taught me again never to read or listen without a pen. Read again, it's caught, not taught. And I can't tell you how many times that I may catch a client's name or their child's name or their dog's name because that what I know is important to them. Mm-hmm. And that's because of what you've taught me. And not just in title, Coach, right? But the best ideas deserve to be captured. And again, I'm reading from the notes just from me listening now, and I've heard this 30, 40, 50 times. You know, you taught me what a servant leader actually looks like, not in title, but how you show up for your people every single day. And that's the truth. I try, like Coach just said. I might not always give my A game, but I'm definitely going to try, and I'm definitely going to grade myself at the end of the evening. I alluded to this just a second ago. You taught me the difference between the FQ and the IQ. And if there's anything from that speech that I take away to give to anybody, especially in this day and age of, you know, what we see through social media, it's that FQ versus IQ. The failure quotient will always determine your growth. Will always determine your growth, and that ceiling faster than your intelligence quotient ever will. You're going to find your brilliance. You're going to find your brilliance. Just find it for yourself. And again, your critics will line up at the door. That's fine. Don't listen to the advice of others or don't listen to the criticism of the advice you never take from anyway. Okay? And how you handle that failure is the real measure. You know, handle that failure with grace. That's okay. I'll get you next time. That's okay. I'll get you next time. And I kind of added to that with, you know what? Yes, thank you. I didn't get it here. Yes, thank you. So 25 years later, Coach, sitting in this building that still bears your name, those lessons are still running, and I'm full of more ideas as I bring it back to my team later today. So I really want to end with this. Coach, what is the one thing you want every person listening today to not only carry with them long after this conversation, but you are a well-read, probably the most well-read man I know personally. What is one quote or what's one thought you could leave them with that they always can come back to?
Pat, the quote would be, of all the things that I just said, I think the most important is listening. And I love the quote, listening is respect. When I listen to you, I am really giving you the ultimate respect. So I don't think anything tops that. Listen to people and listen actively, because listening is respect. That's what I would say.
Listening is respect. And as you're watching this, and as this will be shared with audiences, listen and understand where they came from. I talk a lot about be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's the underlying current of exactly what Coach is imparting his wisdom on us today. As always, God bless, give back, and we'll see you next time.
Remember, whatever you're pursuing, you don't have to have it all figured out. Just start. Take one action step, have one conversation, and trust that what you need is already within you. This is The Pursuit.